Have you ever felt the world grow quiet around you just for a moment, as if the universe itself paused to listen for your reaction? My name is Evelyn Carter, and if you'd seen me on that gray January evening, you might have thought I was just another woman lighting candles for her own birthday content with a quiet life. I always thought my story would be simple: a steady job, a loving family, a daughter who sometimes called me her hero. I never expected that one ordinary birthday would shatter everything I thought I knew about myself and about them. The living room was filled with a half-hearted glow, the kind of light that can't quite chase away the shadows. My daughter Sophia was perched on the couch with her friends, all laughter and perfect hair, their phones buzzing with invisible jokes. My ex-husband Alex sat at the far end of the table swirling wine in a glass. He hadn't offered to refill for anyone but himself. No cake, no decorations, just takeout containers lined up on the counter, and the ghost of old traditions lingering in the air. Even so, I told myself, at least we're together. I tried to hold on to that hope the way you hold a fragile keepsake that's already chipped at the edges. I watched Sophia laugh at a meme on her phone, leaning into her friend with the kind of closeness she used to save for me. For a moment, I wondered if she even remembered the nights I stayed up sewing her costumes, or the way she clung to me during thunderstorms. Maybe I thought this awkward gathering was still proof that I mattered. I tried to convince myself that birthdays didn't need to be perfect to feel special. But the truth was already unraveling, silent and patient. When Sophia's friend pointed at me and whispered, "Is that your mom?" I smiled, hoping for kindness. Instead, Sophia shrugged and said, "She just fixes machines for a living. Not glamorous." Laughter rippled around the room, easy and careless. I felt a strange sensation, like standing outside in the cold looking through a window at a life that was supposed to be mine. Alex raised his glass and smirked. Well, maybe it's time we all admit Evelyn was always more temporary than she realized. His words landed with the weight of a closing door. I didn't shout. I didn't ask why. I simply stood up and excused myself, my voice barely above a whisper. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to steady my breath. My reflection in the darkened window looked unfamiliar. Older, smaller, a woman who'd spent years patching things together for everyone else. I reached for the little gift I'd bought myself, a silver locket empty inside. It was supposed to symbolize a new beginning. But that night it felt more like an apology I'd written to myself. Downstairs, I could still hear their laughter, but it sounded far away, like echoes from another lifetime. I took a deep breath, packed a bag with my essentials, and walked quietly past them. My footsteps nearly silent on the floorboards I'd once refinished with my own hands. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. Sometimes you don't need fireworks or screaming matches to know a chapter has ended. All you need is the sound of the door closing softly behind you and the sudden realization that you are, for the first time in years, utterly alone. Out on the front porch, the night air was sharp and honest. I stood for a moment, letting the cold clear my mind. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something closer to relief. There's a peculiar kind of freedom that comes when you have nothing left to lose. I didn't know where I would sleep that night or what tomorrow would look like. All I knew was that I couldn't be the invisible woman anymore. Not for Sophia, not for Alex, not for anyone. My story, whatever shape it would take, had to begin with the choice to walk away. So under a sky full of indifferent stars, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not let their laughter define me. I would not disappear. And somewhere deep inside, a small stubborn hope began to grow, a hope that maybe, just maybe, the best parts of my story were still waiting to be written. There's an ache that settles in your bones when you realize the people you love most can sometimes become strangers overnight. Sitting in my parked car, rain streaking the windshield, I let the truth finally sink in. My family wasn't really mine anymore. Sophia, my bright, fierce daughter, had slowly slipped away from me, choosing the comfort of her friends and the easy judgments of social media over our old inside jokes and midnight talks. Alex, who once promised me forever, was now little more than a ghost in the same room, his silence more wounding than any cruel word could ever be. It's funny the things you miss when you're grieving a living relationship. I remembered brushing Sophia's hair before school, her sleepy voice calling me, "Mommy, don't go yet," as if my presence could chase away any nightmare. Now she barely looked up from her phone, her laughter reserved for friends who didn't know the shape of her heart. I saw myself in her once curious, stubborn, desperate to belong. Maybe that's why it hurt so much to watch her pull away, to see her forget the woman who patched every scraped knee and wiped away every tear. Losing Alex felt different. His absence was gradual, like wallpaper fading in the sun until you barely notice it's there. Our conversations shrank to schedules and bills. Somewhere between chasing promotions and buying bigger TVs, we stopped holding hands, stopped asking about dreams. I'd convinced myself this was just what marriage looked like after 20 years, that comfort was enough. But the truth was simpler and harder. We'd both become spectators in our own story, watching life pass by from opposite sides of the couch. I wanted to believe that love once bright could survive on embers. Now I knew better. I used to think family was unbreakable, something you could count on even when the world outside turned cold. But sometimes the harshest winters come from inside your own home. I saw women like me everywhere, waiting in line at the grocery store, staring at their phones on park benches, wearing brave smiles as if to say, "I'm fine." The truth is, so many of us carry invisible bruises. Maybe your story isn't exactly mine, but I know what it's like to wonder if you're still needed, to feel like you're fading bit by bit each time someone you love looks right through you. It's easy in moments like these to start blaming yourself. Was I too strict, too soft, too busy? Did I miss some crucial fork in the road? The guilt is as persistent as the pain. But here's what I learned sometimes. People drift not because you failed, but because they're searching for something they think you can't give. Sophia needed to grow. Alex needed validation. And maybe I needed to remember who I was before I became someone's mother or wife. The real tragedy is not in the losing, but in letting your worth be measured by someone else's capacity to see it. If you find yourself here on the other side of a closed door, haunted by laughter that isn't yours, know that you are not alone. All over the world, women are rediscovering their reflection in cracked mirrors, picking up the pieces of the selves they lost along the way. My lesson, whispered to myself through those tearful nights, was this: grief is proof of love, but it does not have to be the end of your story. Sometimes being a stranger in your own life is the first step toward finding the way back to yourself. And as the rain slowed and morning crept across the sky, I realized it was time to stop waiting for their invitation and start opening a door of my own. The first nights alone are the hardest, not because of fear, but because of silence. There's no one asking where you are, no gentle noise in the hallway, just the quiet hum of your own thoughts, echoing against the windows of borrowed spaces. I parked my car near a closed grocery store, the familiar rumble of passing traffic strangely comforting. Inside that little cocoon of metal and fabric, I let the truth settle. I was hiding in plain sight, just another face in a city full of people, each carrying burdens you can't see from the outside. It's surprising how invisible you can feel, even surrounded by millions. I watched a young couple walk past, holding hands, lost in their own world. Their laughter floated through the night, and for a moment I was jealous of their ease, the simple joy of belonging somewhere. I wondered how many women sat in cars like mine, making lists of what to do next, hearts pounding with questions and what-ifs. I remembered a statistic I once read: nearly 1 in 4 American women will experience some form of abandonment or severe loneliness by middle age. I never thought I'd be among them, yet there I was. During those early days, I tried to keep myself busy, as if routines could muffle the ache. I found a 24-hour laundromat, its harsh fluorescent lights casting everyone in the same pale blue. I folded my clothes with care, the way my mother taught me, even though there was no one left to notice the neat stacks. The quiet camaraderie of strangers was oddly soothing, each person there for their own reasons, each with a story they might never tell. It's in these small, overlooked places that you start to see the invisible army of women, holding themselves together, one gentle act at a time. At times, the loneliness threatened to swallow me, but it also gave space for something else, a fragile sense of freedom. I didn't have to put on a brave face for anyone. I could cry or laugh or simply sit in stillness, letting my heart process everything I'd lost. I thought of my friend Margaret, who after her divorce moved across the country, found a job in a bookstore, and finally learned to sleep soundly again. She told me once, the hardest part isn't starting over. It's letting yourself believe you're worth a new beginning. I held on to those words whenever doubt crept in. Looking back, I see now that hiding isn't always a sign of weakness. Sometimes it's how we gather strength. Sometimes we need to step out of the harsh spotlight of judgment and retreat into quiet corners just to remember what peace feels like. My lesson was simple but powerful. Healing often begins in the hush and the spaces we claim for ourselves when the world isn't looking. And as I folded the last of my shirts, I realized that each small choice to rest, to care for myself, to keep going, was a promise that life, however uncertain, was still mine to shape. By the end of that week, the city felt a little less daunting. The same rain-soaked streets that once seemed lonely now offered a kind of anonymity, a chance to start fresh, without anyone's expectations weighing me down. I began to see my own reflection again, not in the mirror of someone else's approval, but in the quiet pride of surviving each day. That's when a new thought took root, not just surviving, but slowly, patiently preparing for something more. It was time to turn my gaze from the rearview mirror to the open road ahead. As the days drifted by in that unfamiliar in-between space, I found my mind wandering back through the years, replaying old memories like scenes from a faded movie. I searched for clues, moments when things first began to unravel, subtle shifts in the air that I'd missed because I was too busy patching up everyone else's problems. The truth is, betrayals rarely arrive overnight. They creep in slowly, like a draft under a locked door, changing the temperature of a family 1 degree at a time until one day you wake up shivering and wonder how long it's been cold. Looking back, there were warning signs I ignored. Alex, who once made me laugh with silly jokes and spontaneous road trips, became withdrawn after his big promotion. The conversations that used to last for hours dwindled into clipped exchanges about bills and schedules. Sophia, my bright-eyed girl, started spending more time with friends, her phone glued to her hand, her gaze drifting further from mine with every passing year. We all got busy. I told myself it was normal, just the growing pains of modern life. Everyone running on empty, hoping love would wait patiently in the background. Sometimes I think I wanted so badly for everything to stay the same that I missed the ways we were all changing. In the quiet moments, I'd catch Alex staring at his laptop long after dinner, the blue glow highlighting the new lines on his face. Sophia began mimicking the world she saw on social media, chasing trends, measuring happiness in likes and comments, instead of in late-night talks with her mother. I see now that we were all chasing some illusion, Alex of success, Sophia of belonging, and me of a family that no longer really existed except in my memory. It isn't just my story. I've watched friends and neighbors lose their footing in the same way. My friend Carla, for instance, saw her marriage fade as her husband's ambitions outgrew their small-town dreams. Another neighbor's teenage son became a stranger, swallowed by the online world. These changes often sneak up quietly, disguised as progress or growing up, but sometimes they're the earliest echoes of loneliness that turn into earthquakes. I think every family, no matter how perfect they look, holds tiny cracks only visible in the softest light. The hardest truth I had to face was this. Sometimes love alone isn't enough to keep people close. We all carry secret hopes and silent fears, and over time, if we don't tend to them, those little distances become chasms. My mistake was believing that sacrifice guaranteed loyalty, that if I kept giving, no one would ever leave. But life isn't a balance sheet, and love isn't a contract. It's a living thing, and if it isn't nourished by honesty and presence, it quietly slips away no matter how hard you hold on. If you're reading this and see yourself in these words, let me offer a small comfort. You are not the first to miss the warning signs, and you won't be the last. Our culture often tells us to keep pushing forward, to ignore our own needs in the name of family or ambition. But my lesson was simple: pay attention to the changes, even the subtle ones. Ask the hard questions before the silence becomes permanent. As I watched the morning light fill the laundromat that day, I promised myself not to look away anymore. I would face the truth, painful as it was, because the only way forward is through honesty, first with others and then with myself. And with that promise, I felt a tiny shift, a first real step toward healing and toward whatever would come next. Some nights the world feels unbearably heavy, heavier than loss itself, heavier than any grief you can name. I remember one evening, headlights streaking past as I sat hunched in the driver's seat, wondering if I could really do this. The savings I had tucked away for emergencies looked small and fragile on my banking app. and the shadows in the empty parking lot stretched longer each hour. There's a kind of exhaustion that isn't just physical, but settles into your spirit, an ache that makes you question everything you thought you knew about your own strength. That's what rock bottom looks like. It's silent, lonely, and real. On those worst nights, even the smallest tasks feel enormous. Making yourself a sandwich, sending out a job application, brushing your teeth in a public restroom, all become quiet battles. I saw a woman in the laundromat one morning, her face lined with the same weariness I felt. She offered me a tired smile, and in that simple gesture I recognized myself. Sometimes the most powerful reminders that we're not alone come from strangers who are also learning how to keep going. There's a strange solidarity in that, the silent, invisible community of survivors. I learned that pain isn't just something to be endured or hidden away. In the quietest hours, pain can become a teacher. It asks you hard questions. What do you value when everything is gone? Who are you without your titles, your comforts, your routines? For me, the answer came slowly. I missed my daughter's laughter, the routine of packing lunches, the way Alex used to squeeze my hand in crowded rooms. But I also missed myself, the woman who once believed she could handle anything. Hitting bottom forced me to finally turn inward and listen for the faint but steady voice that was still mine. During those dark weeks, I thought about my friend Janine, who survived losing both her parents and her job within a single year. She told me there's a moment when the pain stops feeling like drowning and starts to feel like baptism, a harsh, necessary cleansing before you can breathe again. Her words echoed through me, sometimes as comfort, sometimes as a challenge. Could I find meaning in this emptiness? Could I rebuild not just my life, but my heart piece by fragile piece? The answer I learned would only come if I stopped running from the pain and finally welcomed it in. My lesson from those endless, uncertain nights is this: rock bottom is not the end. It is the place where you can lay down what no longer serves you. Anger, regret, the need to be perfect, and make room for something new. Grief isn't a punishment, it's the shadow cast by love. If you're reading this in your own darkest hour, know that the hurt will not last forever. In time, the smallest acts of hope, a gentle word, a deep breath, a single step forward, become the building blocks of healing. And as the first golden rays of morning slipped through the window, I realized that every sunrise is proof. Even after the longest nightlight always returns. The only thing left was to decide what I would do with that new day. There's a quiet kind of courage that grows when you have nothing left to lose. In those days after hitting bottom, I discovered something new inside myself. A flicker of resolve, faint but steady. The world hadn't ended. It had just changed shape. I began to ask not why me, but what now? With every breath, I started piecing together a plan, no longer to win anyone back, but simply to reclaim my own story. Sometimes survival means giving up the dream of the past and planting seeds for a future you can't yet imagine, trusting that hope can grow in the hardest soil. My first step was small but necessary. I visited the public library and, using an old email address, began researching legal rights and community resources for women starting over. I learned that I wasn't powerless, no matter how it sometimes felt. I read stories about women who rebuilt after devastation, teachers, nurses, even engineers who all started again with less than I had. There was Mary, who opened a bakery in her 50s, and Latoya, who went back to school after divorce. Their journeys weren't easy, but they were proof that new beginnings can blossom even from broken ground. Empowered by their examples, I made practical changes. I set up a new bank account in my own name. I met with a legal aid advisor who helped me understand my rights, not just as a wife or mother, but as an individual. I stopped hoping for Alex's apology or Sophia's sudden change of heart. Instead, I began documenting my finances, carefully gathering every scrap of evidence that could help me stand on my own. This wasn't about revenge. It was about quietly reclaiming what was always mine: my independence, my dignity, my future. I also learned the difference between noisy anger and silent strength. It's tempting when you've been hurt to want the world to know your pain, to shout your story from every rooftop. But I saw more value in the patient, steady work of rebuilding. I watched as a neighbor, Ruth, navigated her own messy split with a calm that amazed me. She told me once, "The most powerful thing you can do is keep your head clear and your heart open." Her example reminded me that dignity isn't loud. It's steady and unshakable, especially when the world expects you to fall apart. The lesson from this chapter was simple but profound. The real fight back happens in small, quiet steps. You don't have to set the world on fire to begin again. You just have to light one candle at a time. Each new habit, each brave decision was like a seed planted deep in the dark, waiting for its season to bloom. As I gathered my paperwork and sipped coffee in a borrowed kitchen, I felt the first true stirrings of hope. Maybe my story wasn't over, maybe the best chapters were still waiting to be written. And with that, I took a deep breath and turned to face the day, ready to keep moving forward one quiet victory at a time. It's a strange thing to watch the glossy image others have built begin to unravel. As I quietly rebuilt my foundation, I started to notice small cracks in the stories Alex and Rebecca told the world. There were whispers about unpaid bills, rumors that Rebecca's real estate empire was built more on appearances than substance. Once I saw Alex at the grocery store, his smile forced, as he handed back groceries he couldn't pay for. The people who once seemed untouchable suddenly looked so human-flawed, uncertain, pretending to have it all together while everything was quietly slipping from their grasp. Rebecca was a lesson in the difference between charisma and character. Outwardly, she exuded confidence, always in designer heels, posting carefully curated photos from charity galas and vacation getaways. But behind closed doors, her temper was sharp, her spending reckless, her friendships as fleeting as yesterday's headlines. I learned from mutual acquaintances that her business was under investigation for misusing funds. The image she worked so hard to project success, generosity, stability, was little more than smoke and mirrors. Watching from a distance, I realized how much energy some people spend hiding their cracks instead of healing them. Meanwhile, I kept my focus on my own journey, resisting the urge to gloat or gossip. I remembered my friend Joan, who once said, "Don't waste your energy celebrating someone else's downfall. Use it to rise higher." So I did. I volunteered for a local food pantry and poured myself into my work, letting my days fill with honest effort and genuine connection. Each small step reminded me that real stability comes not from appearances, but from quiet, consistent choices. I saw proof of this in people around me, ordinary folks who built strong lives, not by looking perfect, but by staying true to their values. The truth is, our culture often rewards surface-level success, urging us to keep up with images rather than reality. But sooner or later, the truth surfaces. Alex and Rebecca could only keep up their facade for so long before their problems demanded real solutions. When the bank notices arrived and their social invitations dried up, I thought about the difference between their choices and mine. Their pride was built on sand while I was learning to build on bedrock, however slowly. The lesson was clear. True strength doesn't come from how you look, but from what you do when no one is watching. If you find yourself watching someone else's story crumble, take it as a gentle warning, not an invitation to judge. Life humbles us all sooner or later. Instead, use those moments as mirrors, reminders to nurture your own foundation and to invest in what lasts. As I finished a long day at the pantry, listening to laughter and kindness ripple through the halls, I realized I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of appearances had lifted, replaced by something far more lasting: integrity, community, and the quiet satisfaction of living honestly. And so, with the world outside shifting, I was finally ready to let my true self step into the light, just as the next chapter of my story began to unfold. Sometimes the truth has a way of finding daylight, no matter how carefully others try to keep it hidden. One quiet afternoon, a mutual acquaintance messaged me a link to a video. I hesitated before clicking, afraid it would reopen old wounds. But as the screen lit up, I saw Alex and Rebecca at a city council meeting. Voices raised the story of their financial missteps, suddenly public. Comments poured in from strangers dissecting every detail, some cruel, some sympathetic. Watching from the sidelines, I realized that the story was no longer just ours. It had taken on a life of its own. At first, the attention was overwhelming. Local news reporters called for statements, and people who once ignored me now asked for my side. I was tempted to step into the spotlight to prove I was always the steady one, the honest one. But I remembered the faces of women I'd met at the food pantry. Each of them had their own rumors, their own battles with gossip and judgment. Their stories reminded me that what matters most isn't what the world says about you, but what you know to be true in your heart. Still, it was oddly comforting to be seen after months of feeling invisible. The video sparked conversations across the city. Friends and neighbors debated at coffee shops and in online forums. Some took pleasure in Alex and Rebecca's fall, while others used it as a cautionary tale about appearances and pride. A single mother named Linda reached out to share her own experience with public shaming, how she learned to tune out the noise and focus on what truly mattered. Her message gave me courage. She wrote, "Let them talk. They don't know what it cost you to stand back up." That simple kindness meant more than any headline or apology ever could. Through it all, I held fast to my privacy and my boundaries. I didn't post on social media or answer every question. Instead, I poured my energy into new friendships and meaningful work, gently redirecting the narrative away from scandal and toward healing. The truth I realized is powerful, but it's also deeply personal. I could not control what others believed, but I could choose what I focused on. Slowly, the noise faded. The world's fascination shifted, and I was left with something quieter but more precious, a reputation, built on resilience and kindness, not just survival. The lesson from this storm was clear: public opinion is fleeting, but your own integrity endures. In a world quick to judge and slow to understand, you have to be your own steady ground. The stories people tell may sting, but they cannot define you unless you let them. I learned to hold my head high, knowing that my worth was never up for debate. When gossip subsided and the next big story came along, I found a gentle peace waiting for me. It was the kind of peace that comes from weathering a storm with your dignity intact. As the city buzzed with new drama and the headlines shifted, I felt myself let go of the need to defend, to justify, to be understood by everyone. That space left behind was soon filled with something softer and brighter: genuine connection, self-acceptance, and hope for what might come next. It was in that quiet space I received a letter from Sophia, my daughter, asking if we could talk. The world might be noisy, but inside I was finally ready to listen to her and to my own heart, as a new kind of healing waited just ahead. When Sophia's letter arrived, it felt like a ripple across a calm pond. Unexpected, stirring feelings I thought I'd buried. Her handwriting was familiar, a little rushed, just as it was when she wrote thank you notes as a child. She wrote of regret, confusion, and longing, admitting she missed the easy laughter between us and the comfort of my arms when storms rattled her windows. She didn't ask for forgiveness outright, but she did ask if we could meet and talk. I sat with that letter in my hands for a long while, weighing the ache of the past against the hope for something new. Rebuilding trust with someone you love is rarely a single decision. It's a series of small, brave steps. I remembered stories shared at the food pantry by other mothers, some who had reconciled with children after years of silence, others who chose distance for their own peace. My friend Angela once said, "Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone who hurt you, it's a door you open for yourself." Her words echoed in my mind as I prepared to see Sophia, feeling both vulnerable and quietly strong. The decision to meet was not about forgetting, but about seeing if we could both move forward with honesty. Our meeting was gentle, tentative, like learning to speak a language you once knew by heart. Sophia apologized in halting words, her eyes shining with real remorse. She shared how lost she'd felt, how easy it was to be swept up in her friends' judgments, and Alex's bitterness, how hard it was to see the woman behind the mother she'd taken for granted. I listened, letting her words land softly instead of building walls. In that moment, I realized forgiveness didn't mean erasing the hurt. It meant choosing not to carry it like a stone in my chest anymore. We talked about boundaries and new beginnings, promising to give each other space to grow. I shared my journey not to make her feel guilty, but so she could understand the shape of my healing. It wasn't always easy to be open, but I wanted her to see that I was more than just the mother she'd known. I was a whole person, rebuilding, discovering new strengths. Sophia listened, tears running silently down her cheeks, and reached for my hand the way she had as a child. There was no sudden fix, only the fragile start of something real. The lesson I carried was this: sometimes freedom and forgiveness can walk hand in hand. You can set boundaries and open your heart, letting the past be a teacher, not a jailer. In American families, reconciliation often means letting go of what can't be changed and nurturing what can still grow. If you're facing a crossroads like this, know that there's no single right answer. Sometimes love returns quietly, and sometimes peace is found in loving from a distance. What matters is honoring your own healing, trusting yourself to choose what's right for you. As Sophia and I left the cafe, sunlight danced through the window, painting golden shapes across the table. I felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because I had chosen compassion over bitterness and hope over regret. The world felt a little bigger, possibilities a little brighter. And so, with my heart open to what might come, I was finally ready to embrace the last chapter, not as someone who had simply survived, but as someone who had truly begun to live again. Looking back, I see my story as a winding path, one marked by heartbreak, resilience, and the unexpected beauty that follows a storm. The road from invisible birthdays to new beginnings wasn't a straight line. It twisted through loneliness and grief, forcing me to examine old wounds and let go of illusions I clung to for years. Yet with every step I discovered new strength, rediscovering the quiet power that comes from choosing myself again and again, no matter how loud the world's doubts or how deep my own. I learned that pain, while fierce, can be transformed. In those darkest nights spent in borrowed parking lots and empty kitchens, I realized that rock bottom wasn't my ending, but my foundation. The kindness of strangers, the gentle routines of laundromats and libraries, and the courage to take small steps forward all reminded me that healing is never out of reach. I watched as the facades of others fell away, as the truth rippled out into the world. And as the noise of public opinion faded, I was left with something richer than approval, a life built on honesty, compassion, and genuine connection. Rebuilding a relationship with Sophia became one of my greatest acts of hope. We didn't pretend away the past, but faced it together, each of us learning to forgive and to set boundaries that honored the people we were becoming. Through her, I understood that forgiveness is not about erasing what was done, but about releasing the grip of pain so love, imperfect and fragile, can grow in new soil. And in forgiving her, I also learned to forgive myself for the things I could not see, and for the times I held on too tightly or let go too soon. My journey taught me that true freedom often begins with the simple act of walking away from roles that don't fit, from voices that diminish, from relationships that no longer nurture. It isn't about giving up, but about opening up to possibility, to new friendships, to a future that belongs entirely to you. I embraced my work, found joy in quiet mornings and new faces, and built a life anchored not in the expectations of others, but in the deep certainty that I am enough just as I am. Each chapter was a lesson in courage and patience, and in loving myself through it all. If my story has touched something in your heart, I hope you'll remember this. You are not alone in your struggles. Every step you take, no matter how small or halting, is proof of your strength. Share your own experiences below, your moments of heartbreak, and hope, your lessons, and your dreams. Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe that stories of healing and second chances deserve to be heard. Because your voice matters here, and together, we can build a community where no one has to journey through the darkness alone. Here's to every new beginning, and to the beautiful unfinished story that is still waiting inside you.